Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special episode. I have two guests today, two reoccurring guests, Jordan Lips and Bryan Boorstein. We have both of them on today to chat about some muscle growth, cardio, all that fun stuff like we normally do. So guys, I appreciate both of you guys hopping on today and chatting about this. I don't know if there's anything you want to say before we get started. If not, we can just dive into it.
Yeah, we've both been on enough. People know we're who we are. Whatever. I don't mean that in a douchey way. I just mean we could jump in.
Yeah. People know who we are. Yeah, no, I know what you mean though. Yeah, both of you guys have been on multiple times. So everybody's very familiar. You guys are both guests that like people are like, hey, bring them back on. So it's gonna be super cool to have both of you guys on here to chat about cardio. Jordan, we just had a episode that I think is going to drop tomorrow, which will be a couple weeks ago when this drops, but I'm sure there'll probably be a little bit of overlap on that. But if you want to check on that, we have that. Bryan, I know we did an episode on like zone 2 a while back as well too. So we have that. So a lot more on this type of like cardio and muscle growth. I feel like it's coming out a little bit more lately. So again, wanted to have you guys both on to chat about it. So let's just dive into it. So I wanted to start with your guys' view on cardio, like over time, maybe how that's changed and like where you're at now with it. And then we can maybe cycle into like how your training has changed and whatnot for yourself and clients. But let's just start with your views on cardio over time. And Bryan, I'll hand it to you first, and then Jordan, we'll go to you on it.
Sweet. Yeah. So my views on cardio have changed quite a bit, probably much like the both of you. Jeff's been the late adopter. I'm so glad to see you jumping on the bandwagon now. But no, for me, it started around last summer. So it's been a little bit over a year at this point. And it was a culmination of a few things. I was listening to a lot of Peter Attia talking about the longevity benefits of VO2 max and increased mitochondrial function associated with like zone 2 aerobic activity. And I reflected on my history and remembered how awful my conditioning was at all the respective levels of my competitive career, basketball in high school, and then CrossFit after college. I always held back by that awful 6 to 10 minute time domain where you just have to go and put your head down and not think. So I knew that I was lacking in that area. And so I began picking up cardio at that point, really just for health reasons. I think I was doing like 2 zone 2 and maybe 1 kind of interval based session. And I figured that was looking at the research on concurrent training and all that. It seemed to be skewing in the direction of there being significantly less or a non-existent interference effect, which was such a big concern in even 5 years ago. There was so much concern about the interference effect on hypertrophy, and hypertrophy has always been my number one. So I didn't want to do anything that would impact that. So I felt like 2 zone 2 and 1 zone 5 session was reasonable. That went on for a few months. And then I was talked into signing up for a 50-mile mountain bike / gravel race this coming October. So it was about a year ago that I signed up for it. And as soon as I signed up for that last fall, it was like a fire was lit underneath me. And suddenly my pursuit changed from this health-driven pursuit to being a performance-based pursuit. And so we can get into that and how that affects my lifting and all those things. But to sum it up, my current view on cardio is that it's really solid for health. I've felt the significant benefits of it in energy throughout daily life and stuff like that as well. And yeah, I'm a huge proponent of it. And I think that the magic is in the dosing and the intensity when trying to combine it with lifting and optimizing both.
Real quick, I was just going to jump in real quick, Jordan. Bryan, I'm just curious. I know you had, I was wondering if you used to have a CrossFit kind of background. Was that like maybe something that was incorporated a little bit in there, or was it maybe a little bit different in terms of how it went? Because I feel like there was probably a little bit of cardio based in that CrossFit.
Oh, CrossFit stuff was a ton of cardio. That was actually one of the main reasons I moved away from CrossFit as a primary pursuit, because I was just getting dropped. Like I just could not keep up with the people that I was comparing myself to on 6 to 10 minute workouts or 20-minute workouts, like any of those middle range, call them threshold type workouts, like 20 minutes, like 5K row type workouts. Like I'm actually good at rowing, but that type of time domain, like that, like 6 to 20 minutes, I would just get dropped. And it was just becoming depressing to me because I wasn't getting better at it. And so, yeah, CrossFit had tons of cardio in it, but I didn't do it in a strategic manner, training the monostructural pursuits of rowing, running, biking. It was always this mixed modal pursuit where you could almost cheat the stimulus by resting and things like that. And so I wish I knew at the time that I just needed to do more rowing, running, biking, and that would have improved my CrossFit so much. But I was very stuck in this idea of I need to do these skills while I do cardio, and my cardio never actually improved.
Gotcha. Yeah, I figured there was a pretty good overlap there with it. I didn't, again, like you said, it probably wasn't focused on like zone 2 specifically. It was just, again, like more performance based. Cool. Yeah, Jordan, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think the views on cardio over time, how things have changed. I think it's just, I used to be a believer, and we can dissect how this came about. A believer of, oh, if you just lift and you walk, then that's enough for health. And this whole like, oh, my heart rate gets up while I'm lifting, and so I'm good. And I think that was mostly just like fit what I cared about. And so I just remanufactured that rationale of I just really cared about what I looked like. I hated doing cardio. I was really bad at cardio. I have exercise-induced asthma. I've played sports at a collegiate level, and I've always been the worst cardio, like by far. It's never even been like, it's just always been something I've been bad at. So I self-selected both that as a point of view and self-selected like pursuits that didn't have to do with cardio. And it turns out that's just not true. Like lifting and walking is not enough if your goal is like optimizing health. It's enough in conjunction with having good nutrition, not too much body fat, good other healthy habits of being an overall healthy person. You can be an overall healthy person without doing direct cardio, but it is not, technically speaking, if we're looking at this as like a pie chart, like there's a big chunk missing if you're not doing any direct cardio. And I was mostly in denial, just like ignorance is bliss about that sort of stuff. Didn't really want to learn more about it. And I think it just shifted and I will also say that, so I don't want to go on a longer rant, but it shifted when I started to care more about health. Now I cracked myself up because I know that the things that have led me to care more about health and longevity have to do with just growing older and starting a family and just a lot of those things. But it also, and Bryan, you could jump in, if it also has to do with the fact that my gains have slowed down so much that now to do what I'd have to do to keep getting bigger, I don't want to do. So it's almost like that shift has been twofold. We're like, yes, I care more about being healthy and I'm really in touch with wanting to be physically independent for the long-term, fighting disease. I very much connected with that lately, but I also know that I've been pushed into that because I know that, God, I don't want to, I don't want to frame it this way. I don't want to do the things I'd have to do to keep growing. My gains have, the gains have become more difficult, that I've just now actually naturally been shoved or nudged into the direction of, well, now I'm self-selecting, not wanting to do that because I know that things I would have to do, I don't want to do. And the frustrating part is for most people is that cardio doesn't make you look better. That's the thing. Getting more fit cardiovascularly outside of the caloric burn and potentially weight maintenance, which I would actually say is contestable, if it even helps because of the hunger that it brings. It's frustrating because it doesn't make you look any better. And so if you are somebody who's pursuing optimal health, you're probably going to have to do a decent amount of direct cardio and a decent amount of direct lifting. Let's say you care about optimal health and you want to look good. Muscular, we'll say, is good, whatever. It's tough because you probably can't do either of those to 100%, which means you're going to have to do less of something that makes you look better. Let's say better, meaning more muscular. And you're going to have to replace it with something that doesn't give you that. And so it is difficult sometimes for people to be like, I can't do 5 days of lifting anymore because I don't have time to also do 3 days of cardio. Of course, you could do them both, but I'm saying in a practical, real world time constraint scenario. So I know Bryan recently, I'm sure we'll touch on it at some point. You've really gone back to a romanticized 3-day full body program, and I have drastically decreased my volume. I'm still doing 4 days, but my workouts are like 35 minutes, my hypertrophy sessions. And so it is difficult because you have to take away something most people do. Most people have a time constraint that would require this, but yeah, you have to do a little less of something that makes you look better and add in something that doesn't help your aesthetics, but it really does help from a health perspective. And so that's really been how I've come to this place of doing both.
Bryan, if you had any thoughts on that.
I was just going to say that Jordan alluded to one thing about the gains slowing down, and seeing gains doing something where gains aren't slow is addictive. That is, man, it is addictive. Like newbie gains were addictive when I first started lifting. And I cracked myself up thinking about what's going to happen when the marginal gains occur in cardio, like a year or two from now, when they slow down and I have to work so hard just to shave 5 seconds off of my 10-mile time or something along those lines. And it's, man, I think I'm probably going to burn out on cardio at that point too. And then it'll rotate and it'll flip flop and it'll go back to lifting as a priority. But yeah, eventually things slow down. But in this honeymoon phase that I'm in right now, where things are just happening, and you can feel the adaptations. Literally, if it's not weekly, it's monthly. Something really cool happens, and I'm like, holy shit, I didn't know I could do that. That is invigorating and really cool.
Yeah, no, that's a good point you bring up there. I like that you talked about how it's going to slow down as well too, and seeing how much you have to do for the cardio at some point. That's going to be like how much you have to do to improve. That's going to be tough, especially for people like us that probably our first love is probably the hypertrophy side, lifting weights, and whatnot. There, Jordan, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to follow up there on Brian's thoughts.
That's an intriguing foresight of I've talked recently about I really suck at this. I really suck. Like Brian, like you're posting a lot of your stuff, and we've had like just some. It's not apples to apples, but hey, what wattage are you doing on the air bike for zone 2 or whatever? And I legit suck. Like I'm at like, and I say that in an endearing, like more of a tongue in cheek way, because I'm really enjoying it. I'm enjoying sucking, and there's a confounder of I suck, but I am getting better, and that tangible improvement is not something I've felt in the last 5 to 7 years of lifting. Now I'm not that muscular. I don't even at my like peak muscularity. It's just all relative to me. I'm not saying I got so big that I couldn't make gains. I got to a point where I didn't want to do more to continue to get bigger. But so I'm sure that I could have continued to make gains. But with this, yeah, it's been a while since I've had tangible. Yeah, and yeah, that's it. It's been a while since I've had tangible results, and I wonder what will happen when those two slow down.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point too. That it's all relative to you as well too, right? Like how far you want to take it, right? For somebody that maybe does want to maximize muscle growth as much as they can, this might be a little bit of a different conversation here. I'm sure they'll both help each other in a way. Like cardio, we'll probably hit on this. Cardio could help your muscle, could help with hypertrophy, but also at the same time, you have to find just that right dosage. Like you said, Brian, initially, it's all in that it's the magic in terms of like how much you do, how you program it, et cetera, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point today. I didn't know if there's anything you guys wanted to add on that. If not, maybe what we can take this now is like how your training has changed recently. Again, Jordan, like we talked about this, but I think it'll be awesome to dive into it again with Brian on here as well too. So I'll have you start with that in terms of how your training has changed recently. And then Brian, if you have anything you want to say, and then Brian, we can go to yours.
Yep.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we talked about it a little bit, but we could reiterate. I'm still training 4 days a week hypertrophy, but I've brought my volume down to, eight working sets per workout, roughly 35 minutes, mostly bilateral pushing and pulling, not a lot of elbow flexion extension, not a lot of bicep tricep. Actually, I think currently in this cycle, I have no bicep tricep movements. I have 3 pushes, 3 pulls, 2 medial delts, and that's it. And then I'm currently training for a half marathon in December. And on top of those 4 sessions, I have 5 cardio sessions, 2 of which are very low intensity, very low RPE, we'd say, more so like skill development. Maybe if you were likening this to a power lifter, it'd be like light going through the motions of the big lifts, maybe speed work or some correlate there where I'm not like working super hard, but I'm practicing the skill. And then 3 more demanding days of cross training, let's say on the air bike or something like that. And it sounds like a lot, and it is certainly the most time I've ever devoted to training. And I will say people who are looking to do something like hybrid training, air quotes, it takes more time. It takes more time. You're going to need endurance exercise in general takes longer. And so that is something that you definitely need to be on board for sure. Now, there are ways to get a better stimulus to time ratio for health for sure. You don't need to take it as far as that either Brian or I are doing this with an actual like performance goal. But that's more or less what I'm currently doing. And I think I'm nearing the cap in terms of time allocation and talking with my coach, Alex Viata, just like about where to continue to push the stimulus without increasing the volume, just because you have certain time domains that you can add frequency, an additional workout. You can add a time onto the workout. Instead of it being 45 minutes of zone 2, it can be 60, 75, 90, whatever. You can, so you can make the workouts longer. You can do more of them. You can go faster, all of those sorts of things for a sense of overload. But that's what I'm currently doing. It feels manageable. I haven't missed a workout, which I'm the most proud of because I literally still, we can touch on this, but I just still hate doing it. It's not something that I look forward to basically at all. People talk a lot about like runner's high and cardio, endorphins and stuff, and they exist. There are times I have that in the tunnel vision. Really, I get a good piece of music on or something, I'm in the zone. Totally, that happens. But on the net balance, I really am not looking forward to the workouts. And I'm not saying that to dishearten anybody. I'm still doing them and I'm happy when it's done. I'm always happy when I do them. And we'll talk about feeling better and all this stuff. Like I do feel better. I feel good when I do them. I'm happy about all of the net results, but there is certainly an element of, I don't know, maybe just for the person out there who's, I don't really like doing any cardio. I would say that try different modalities for sure, but sometimes you don't have to love it. Sometimes you have to love the net of the doing it and the short-term results and the long-term results. And if you can combine all of those into it, it's worth it. I think that's good enough.
What are you doing with your leg training? You said 3 pushes, 3 pulls, and 2 medial delts. That's all upper body stuff.
Yep. I'm doing one. So I'm doing one hinge. So one leg day is RDL leg extension, hip flexor. The other day is a squat pattern, ham curl, hip extension. So the exact opposite. So I'll have a heavy lengthened for the hamstring glutes, which is the RDL. Then I'll have quads shortened. And then I'll do a hip flexion movement, which is like a single leg hip flexor on the cable. And then the other day is the exact opposite, where I'll have a squat pattern. I haven't done it yet, but I'm trying just a barbell back squat. That's all I have available. I could do a split squat or a foam roller hack or a landmine hack or whatever. I could do I could do a hex bar, quad emphasis, but I'm just going to try a bread and butter quad emphasis barbell back squat. I'm in the market for a hack squat. So if you're on Facebook Marketplace, you want to throw me a bone here. So I'm going to try bilateral barbell back squat, quad emphasis, seated hamstring curl, and then just a hip extension, 2 sets of everything, relatively close to failure. And I've found that's been enough to maintain and depending on what proxy you would use for progress, it's been enough to progress, but I'm really not so concerned with the progression. I don't want to get injured. I don't want my knees to hurt. And yeah, I want to stay strong and keep the muscle I currently have.
Cool. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to jump in real quick. Have you found that maybe your volume's a little bit lower for the lower body, maybe than what, and maybe it's a little bit more emphasis on upper body, or what does that look like?
I think they're all on maintenance. I think they're all roughly on maintenance. I think that they're all, listen, I'm certainly in a place where if I'm maintaining on that, I'm stoked. If I'm making any gains at all, I'm stoked. It is certainly like time wise. The irony is time wise and recoverability. I think they're even, like, just as there's no upper body movement that is comparable to an RDL in terms of stimulus or fatigue. And so, yeah, I'm doing less sets for a lower body, but I think from a stimulus and a fatigue perspective, it's relatively even. Like the workouts take me a similar amount of time. Frankly, the lower body days probably take me longer, even if it's less exercises, just warming up and resting between and set up and breakdown and all that stuff. And it feels like what I'm hoping to get out of all of the workouts, it feels even from an upper and lower perspective.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah. So on the back of one of the things that Jordan was talking about regarding volume and how long it takes to do cardio endurance work, the polarized model of cardiovascular training essentially states that 80% or up to 90% of your training time should be in zone 2, basically. And that's great and dandy and all if you have 15 hours to be doing cardio every week. But Jordan alluded to one of the levers that you can pull if you can't increase frequency or increase duration or whatever is to increase intensity. The problem that we have with increasing intensity is that looking at the literature, it doesn't seem to be like there's really much benefit in doing like these high intensity threshold sessions more than 2 times or maximum 3 times per week. Hey guys, can you please stay out of my podcast right now? Hold on. No. So you're limited by total time because there might be marginal benefit, it seems, in doing 3 high intensity cardiovascular sessions a week, but 2 gets you 95% of the benefit or something along those lines. It would be like training to 1 or 2 RIR versus training to failure. Maybe there's a little bit more gains to be had there, but hey, if you're at 1 to 2 RIR, you're doing great. And so yeah, it's been difficult for me because increasing volume is something that I am trying to do because the race that I'm doing is potentially a 4-hour race. And so I want to accrue time in the saddle. I want to know that I can sit there for 3 or 4 hours and still continue to churn out power. So I have actually had to pull the lever of volume, and I'm doing a ton of time on the bike now. I have 1 ride a week that's between 2 and 3 hours, and it's just slow, steady endurance, just spinning more or less. And then I have 3 zone 2 rides that are about an hour, maybe hour 15. And I'm like right at the threshold of zone 2 where it's like, I can talk and I can pass the talk test, but there's moments where I'd just rather not, you know what I mean? And so I have 3 of those. And then I have 2 high intensity sessions a week. That's where I'm at right now. And then as far as how that's affecting my lifting, as Jordan said, I've basically just in the last few days dropped to a 3 times a week full body program. And I was on a 4 to 5 times a week split like you and I have set up, Jeff, where it's not a real official split. It's just smealing things together as we need them to be. And the reason that this all happened is because I was sitting there before my quad day a couple days ago. And I was like, man, if I do this quad day and I do 5 hard sets to failure plus partials and like all these things that I had on the agenda, I'm not going to be able to function very well for the next 4 or 5 days. And that's going to affect my biking. And I've decided that biking is my priority up until October when this race is over. And so I need to make decisions that support my objective. And then in that moment, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do 2 sets of hamstrings, 2 sets of quads, whatever it is, 2 sets of push, 2 sets of pull, an arm exercise, a delt exercise, and get out of here. And so that's more or less the way that my programming is designed now. And it's been great. I've done 2 sessions that way, and I haven't gotten sore at all. No muscle group gets sore, but they all feel sufficiently stimulated during the workout. They're all pumped. They're all like, oh, crampy. I can barely walk after doing a set of hack press. Within a few hours, I'm back to good. I could do a bike ride. I can go do intervals the next day, whatever it is. This structure, I think, is going to work really well for me through the race in October. And then I can reassess and take things from there.
Real quick on that, you made, I don't know if you hit on it, Brian. So Jordan, I know you're doing a half marathon, but Brian, you're doing a race, a bike cycling race. I don't know if you hit on.
Yeah, it's a 50-mile gravel off-road race. And so I'm not 100% sure how much is straight gravel versus potentially more rugged terrain. If it's straight gravel, I think I've worked my conditioning up to a point that I should be able to go sub 4 hours unless something bad happens to me or my bike. If it's got more off-road terrain and stuff like roots and rocks, I am not sure how that's going to go. But I'm guessing it's going to be between 3.5 and 5 hours. So I'm just preparing for that and trying to accrue as much mileage as I can, both in the week, but also in an individual session. So I did 30 miles. One time I would do 30 miles for 3 straight weeks. And then the next week I did 35 miles. And then I took a week off and didn't do any long rides. And then this week, just a few days ago, I did 40 miles. So I'm just gradually rocking myself up there, making sure I take time off when I need time off. And it's been like a 3-week accumulation phase with a 1 week or half a week deload reset, and then another like 3-week accumulation. And in that 3-week accumulation, I'm increasing both volume and intensity. So it would almost be like the RP method of hypertrophy, except applying it to endurance. And so then I hit that peak at 3 weeks and I deload and then start over and work back up again.
Jordan, I don't know if you had any follow-ups. I have a few questions to follow up there.
I'm curious, what's your longest workout? So I think it's different for running and for biking just because of the impact, like the length of the workout. It's my understanding that at least for running that we start to see, and again, what's hysterical, Brian and I have talked about it, and Jeff and I think we have talked about it, that like the endurance community has not yet fully adopted, for whatever reason, the term SFR. Just don't understand. Like, it applies so unbelievably well to so many things. And they just like, I hear people on podcasts and I'm like, guys, SFR is what you're trying to say. It just looks, again, like all these guys, they're like, I'm like, guys, SFR, come on. And so for running, there seems to be like a big SFR drop around that two hour mark from a bone adaptation perspective, but also from a cardiac drift perspective. But I think for biking, it's got to be extended because you don't have the impact issue.
Yeah, they talk a lot on cycling podcasts about the benefit of the 4 to 6 hour ride and PGC1 alpha and all that stuff. And it's not even that you have to go hard. We're not talking about on the border of the VT1, LT1 threshold. We're not talking about the top of zone 2. Yeah, you're talking about being below that into just a sustainable pace. And the interesting thing that happens is that with cardiac drift and stuff, by the end of that 4 to 6 hour ride, you're still like right smack dab at the top of zone 2, but you have to start low or else you're going to end up in zone 4 by the end of that ride. So yeah, there's definitely certain adaptations that happen there. My longest ride so far is 2 hours and 45 minutes. So I'm not quite there yet.
But just even cardiac drift, the entire discussion of cardiac drift, and I'll pause just for defining that real quick. Cardiac drift just means if I set out to run, let's say I'm running 5 miles an hour, 12-minute pace or something. And for an hour or two, my heart rate is 130-ish. And you might say that's a universally or perpetually sustainable pace for me, that I could remain forever. But that's not truly the case. If I keep running like that, eventually my heart rate will go up. Eventually I will get more tired. Eventually my heart rate will drift upwards at that same pace, no matter what. If you go, it's like just an acknowledgement that no matter what speed you do, you can't actually do it forever. And what ends up happening is, let's say I go out and I'm doing a zone 2 ride, and zone 2 in air quotes just being like something that you could sustain for quite a long period of time in perpetuity, maybe an hour or 2 or longer, whatever. But technically what happens is if you remain at that pace, your heart rate will drift up. And that's an indication of, let's say, greater fatigue, of you're working harder to maintain the same pace. And so what's essentially happening is the SFR is going down. Like you're working at the same pace, but you're incurring more fatigue. And it just kills me. The amount of times that I read about cardiac drift and nobody says the word SFR. They like say it in like a 4-page chapter when I'm like, you could have just wrote a 3-letter acronym. And so that has been interesting to me to see that as well. So I was wondering, I think with biking, the time scales are all elongated because of the lack of impact for sure.
Yeah. What I've heard and what I've experienced myself from the very few times that I go run is it seems to me that the sense of fatigue and stimulus that I get from an hour of zone 2 biking seems like about a half hour of running. It seems to be about 50% of the time that I can run for a half hour and feel as if I got the same stimulus and fatigue as if I biked for an hour.
Do you think there are a lot of moving parts there though? Like how fast are you running? How good are you at running? Like how efficient?
No, yeah. I'm thinking about it in the sense of running a marathon or running a half marathon for you is going to be around 2 hours or something along those lines.
I'll tell you guys, right. I just hope that I finish. I'm just like, I have no expectations. If you run at a 5 mile an hour pace, which is a 12-minute mile pace.
Yeah.
You get it done in an hour.
That would be 2.5 hours.
Yeah. 2.5.
Yeah.
I'd love to, I'd love to just finish it my goal is to finish it without walking. But
yeah,
that feels ambitious to me, frankly. But we'll
see. You have plenty of time to get there. Like as the race has gotten closer for me and I've put in more time and made it more a priority, I've seen the adaptations happen faster. Like for what I'm trying to say basically is that 50 miles was really daunting to me. And it's approximately like a 4-hour race, maybe 5. So it's about double what you're doing.
Understood.
That's more what I'm trying to say. I don't have any scientific basis or anything. It's just my conjecture, my sense of feeling is that if you go out and you run a marathon, which is 2 hours, and you're a really skilled runner, you're the best in the world, you're Kipchoge, you're running a 2-hour marathon, that would be the equivalent stimulus and fatigue of biking 4-hour time trial or something along those lines.
Right. Yep. That makes sense. That tracks. Yep.
So yeah, I don't know where exactly I was going with that, but cardiac decoupling. So that's related to cardiac drift. Is essentially decoupling is the idea that say you're doing 150 watts of power and your heart rate is 125, it decouples because either your heart rate goes up and the watts stay the same, or your heart rate stays the same and the watts go down. And so that's really one of the cool things about having access to both of those tracking mechanisms. Instead of just using heart rate or just using watts, you can cross compare and you can see at what point does that decoupling begin to occur when you're doing a zone 2 session. And when I get it right, like when I'm not pushing the limit of zone 2, but I'm maybe more in like the middle or the lower end of zone 2, I don't really notice decoupling as long as I'm staying hydrated and I'm staying cool. If there's air on me, there's like a big fan if I'm doing it indoor, or there's air from outdoor, and I'm making sure to keep the electrolytes in and I'm staying hydrated and all that, there isn't much decoupling at all. The decoupling occurs that I've noticed is on the higher end of the effort spectrum, like pushing that threshold between zone 2. Although to your point, I think that it would also decouple if I were to ride for 4, 5, or 6 hours, which I just don't have that experience.
Yeah, you better believe when you cross the finish line, the speed you're going and the heart rate that you have at that moment, it doesn't make sense from the outside looking in. I'll finish the race going 5 miles an hour, but my heart will be like 170 trying to maintain that pace.
Yeah.
I hope that's what happens.
Yeah.
So is that just from that's just basically like this concept of as you do something longer, it's going to get tougher. So you're basically like what you're doing initially is it's just a lot harder to do it. So like you said, Jordan, there with that example of the SFR of it, it's just when you weight train for a while, if you just do a ton of like volume, it's eventually you're going to get to that point to where it's probably more like junkish type. But obviously this is a little bit different.
It's not that different. It's dead on. It becomes junk volume. Junk volume is just bad SFR volume. That's what it is. And that's what ends up happening. It's like you're working at intensity 4, but it feels like a fatigue 10. And so it's like doing your 80th set in a row of lateral raises where you're now grabbing a pair of pens, but it feels like they're 50 pounders.
Or I could see where maybe this gets a little bit different is like for hypertrophy, you're not ever going to do anything to where it's like you need to make sure you perform that. Whereas for endurance or something like this, you guys have a race, you're going to probably have to get there at some point. So I'm assuming if you're like training, it's going to look a little bit different. I'm assuming you wouldn't want to get to that point very often in your, like when you're training for it, but like when you're actually doing the performance of the biking for Bryan or for you, the running, that's just something that you're just like, hey, it is what it is at that point.
It's like how often do powerlifters do a 100% 1RM in their training?
Yeah.
Never, until the platform, ideally, in theory. Yeah.
Cool.
So real quick, Jeff, just to maybe an interesting way of saying this would be that you spend most of your time training either like below the first lactate threshold, which would be like zone 2, or doing like higher intensity intervals. You don't often just hang out in that like suck for an hour, but when you race, that's literally where you are. You just hang out in the suck for an hour, but you don't necessarily have to train that. You can stay on the outskirts of the aisle of the grocery store. You don't have to shop in the middle to still be able to go in the middle and do some good work in there. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think that's one way of looking at it.
So where I wanted to ask on this real quick, or maybe for some people listening. So obviously you guys both have performance goals here that you're trying to hit. Bryan, again, you're trying to do the race. Jordan, you're trying to do a race as well. Maybe how would this be a little bit different if somebody just is looking for a health standpoint versus, would it be different or anything like that when it comes to the cardio side of things? What would that look like?
Yeah, you do a lot less, a lot less than I'm doing. I think probably a little bit less than what Jordan's doing as well. I really think that for health, you can hit 2 to 3 zone 2 workouts. And I'm not even sure that you need to do like a zone 5 interval type workout for health if you're lifting weights. I think like you throw in steps, like you're getting 6 to 8,000, maybe six is wrong, 8,000 steps. You're doing zone 2 or 3 times a week, and you're lifting weights 3 or 4 times a week. I don't think there's a ton of significant benefits to be had for health beyond that. I think you're working within the margins at that point.
Agreed. I think that's well said. You would do less. You'd have less specificity in what you have to do. You'd have less consequences in the way you're arranging things. There'd be less stress around doing things in a perfect way. So what you're doing and the mentality you'd go about it with would both be different, how much you're doing it. I will gently speak to the fact that I'm typically, Jeff, and you and I talk about this, and I'm not sure how Bryan, I'd be interested in how Bryan feels about this, but I'm not typically someone who, I don't care about performance. I've never cared. I've been, from a lifting perspective, I've never cared about how strong I am. Like, I don't care about the numbers. I don't care about that. It's just purely a health and aesthetic based pursuit. I don't care. I'm not strong. In soccer, I just didn't care about my 1 mile, my 2 miles. It was about getting on the field and what I could do. And so for this, I thought I was going to go into the approach with, I just want to find out what is the healthiest routine? What is the optimal health routine? And that is not what I'm doing. And so why have I chosen an external stressor in the form of a race that's requiring me to go above that, what I would realistically care about, which is just to be healthy? And I think I've come to just 2 small conclusions that Jeff and I talked about, so I won't belabor them. One is that my personality, when I'm learning about something new, the best way for me to ultimately end up finding where I am, what my final opinion on things is, to take it to the absolute extreme. And then along the way, I will have experienced the whole gamut, the whole plethora, the whole magnitude of different levels of intensity of taking this. And I'll get a feel for being able to help others figure that out, where that sweet spot is for them. I'll find out where that sweet spot is for me, and I'll have experience across the whole thing. And the second is that I fucking hate doing cardio. And so this external stimulus, or this external stressor of I have the race, is in this context really helpful. I talk about this in my content a lot. I'm not always sure that external stressor is a good thing. I don't think every person who's trying to lose fat needs to book a photo shoot. I don't think everybody who's looking to lose fat needs to get on stage. I don't think everyone who wants to do cardio needs to sign up for a marathon. I don't think you don't need to do a powerlifting meet, but like, some people benefit from that stuff. And for some people, that external stressor, it's a net positive. For others, it makes it less fun. People are like, oh, I want to do my first chin up, and they're like super focused on it. And for them, it makes going to the gym more fun. They're more consistent. For others, it makes it mega fucking stressful and no fun, because it's just all about this one end point, and there's an inability to enjoy the process. And I just find it interesting for me that this was something where I was like, you know what, as much as I don't actually care about running marathons in my life, that it was going to be the thing that was going to make me go all in, which I think is good for my education, which is what I care about a lot. But I also think that it's getting me to show up every day. And so I think even for someone who doesn't really lean into that external stressor, that this has been a positive. So if you're someone out there who thinks, I'm also not into that sort of booking a show or booking a contest or some sort of race or something, like, maybe give it a shot. Like, it's so far been a nice thing.
Yeah, I could see
you're good.
Having that external motivation. Again, it's just very dependent on the person. So sorry, that was all I was going to say. Bryan, go ahead.
Yeah, of course. I find myself more driven by performance. I'm not necessarily caring to compete against anybody else, but I find competing against myself to be an absolute necessity to drive me forward. And even today, I'm racing myself on this. Strava has these segments. And so there's this one segment on the bike path that's 2.1 miles and whatever. And so I was racing it, and then some chick decides that she's going to turn her bike around in the middle of the bike path without looking to see who's coming first. And I have to come to a skidding stop, and then I'm stopped, and I'm like, shit. And I have to like get momentum going again. And I'm like, oh, my whole segment is screwed now. So in most people who are just going by, hey, I'm doing this for health and whatever, they're not impacted by that situation. But to me, trying to chase a PR on this segment of this bike path, that really frustrated
would you be
me.
chasing
And so,
that PR? Would you be chasing that PR if you didn't have the race? So I think that I want you to get back to what you're saying, but there's probably a difference between wanting to push yourself to get better. Like I couldn't keep going into the gym to do my hypertrophy sessions without tracking it and without trying to progressively overload. But I'm not prepping for a show with a date. And so I too need to track what I'm doing to make sure I'm moving forward, or I find that to be very helpful. But you have a race. If you didn't have a race, you might not have been as pissed off.
Yeah, totally. No, 100% right. I still would feel though that like I put in 8 minutes of good work to get to that point, and then all I had was like this half a mile to go, and man, why did this have to happen at that moment? So I think the race is certainly a larger component of it, but I probably would have been semi-frustrated anyways, just because who wants to have to stop when you're going 20 miles an hour and then start again? But I love the accountability that these things provide. Like me against me. I even love how when I would diet in the last few years and I would post my body weight daily onto Instagram, and I would write the little caption along with it, and people would follow along, and I'd get tons of DMs about people with like questions and urging me on and all this stuff. Like that fact that I was posting my body weight to Instagram every day, it kept me from eating a lot of things that I probably shouldn't be eating. And if I didn't have that accountability circle that I created for myself, my diets may have not been as successful. And I'm one that does depend on things like that. And I thrive under those types of circumstances. And I think we're like a little bit different in that way, but similar in many others.
I could see too, like how having that for, again, something that maybe you're not like super fond of, for example, cardio for us, having that external motivation could be super helpful. This is why I'm interested in doing a little bit more of this like zone 2, because I'm staying with you guys. I've hated cardio for the longest time and just thought, oh, I don't need to do any of it. And I'm only doing one a week right now. And I could definitely see where it's going to be interesting to see, like when I get to that point to where it's like, all right, am I not motivated to do this? Like, how do I work through that so then I can relate better to clients? And do I need to find some sort of external motivation for it? But I feel like I'm still early in it to where and I only do one per week right now. So I don't have enough of that right now to decide there. So that'll be interesting moving forward. So was there anything you guys wanted to follow up on either of those points, or do you want to go into the next topic? Cool. Yeah. So I was just going to ask how, like, you guys, with all this knowledge, like, obviously we know how, like, you guys have changed your kind of programming for yourself, and you guys have these external goals there with that. But what about for your clients? Has this changed anything in terms of how you like program for clients, even if, again, they're just maybe more body count focused, just trying to look better, get stronger, stuff like that? Has that changed how you've programmed for them? And yeah, what does that kind of look like there?
Go, Jordan.
Yeah. As someone who's your coach, first and foremost, looking out for like your best life, happiest life, healthiest life, I think it's just made me echo some of the beliefs I shared earlier of like, hey, I know that I care mostly in order of importance of, hey, the calories you're taking in, the protein you're taking in, the lifts that you're getting in, the steps that you're getting. But there's probably, it's still, if we're drawing this metaphorical pie chart, there's probably still a pie chart there that's not fulfilled without some dedicated cardio. And whether or not a person has time for that, or cares about that, or wants to do that, or enjoys it, some combination of all that, I think it's just made me bring that to the forefront of the conversation, not the forefront, but bring it to the conversation at some point where it might have been more of a discussion of, hey, you're getting your steps, you're getting your lifts, you're doing whatever you need to do with your calories and your protein and all that stuff. And that's good. And it probably might not have made it its way unless a client was like, hey, I like doing cardio, what can I do? Then of course I would have reciprocated, but it's just bumped its way into something that I will intentionally discuss at some point. Hey, if not to get reductionist about it, but I always get a little bit squirrely about telling people they need to spend money or telling people they need to spend more time on stuff, because I don't know everyone's situation. But the way I think about it from a very general, because if we're talking to an individual, we can be more specific. But if you're listening to this and you ever get on a treadmill, or you get on a Stairmaster, you get on a bike, go a little faster than your stroll out in the park is my advice. If you are somebody who's already getting on a piece of cardio equipment, go a smidge faster, which probably puts you in zone 2-ish. If you're going to go out for a walk in nature, you're going to walk the dog and go for a little hike, a little trail or something, don't stress about it. Just go for a nice walk and enjoy being outside. You want to go faster there too, fine. But to me, it's if you're getting on a piece of cardio equipment, go a little faster. Like the difference in stress in terms of like annoyance of walking on a treadmill at 3 miles an hour and 3.8 miles an hour, like it's faster, but like it's the same shit at the end of the day. Like it's not that much more annoying. Going 3 miles around your block in a nice stroll versus fucking power walking is more annoying. And so that's something I've brought to my like general recommendations is if you're going to get on a piece of cardio equipment, let's make this something that is on the intensity scale a little bit harder than your zone 1 walk around the pond, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say I also at least talk about it with people. I found just such tremendous benefit even in the earlier months of doing it before it became a performance goal, where I was just doing the version of that I talk about for health, adding 2 or 3 zone 2 sessions a week and maybe the higher intensity session if you have the time and feel like it. I've just reaped such good benefits from it as far as sleep, mood, energy, focus. My blood work, which has never been bad, is the best it's ever been when I just did it back in April. Or was May, whatever. It was a couple months ago. It was the best it's ever been in the last 10 plus years. And so that's super encouraging as well. And it's obviously my N of 1, but all the clients that I have began giving them some zone 2 work have noted the same thing. And in some cases, I still work with some clients that are from that kind of CrossFit background. And so we've mostly gone over to a physique approach, but some of them will want a Metcon at the end of their training. So it'll be like 3 bodybuilding movements and then a 10-minute AMRAP of some sort. And so we've gotten to the point where, hey, maybe instead of doing that 10-minute AMRAP, we just hop on the bike and spin for 45 minutes or something. And they get that sense of still feeling like they're breathing. They're getting the thing that really they're looking for, but it's done in a much lower stress way that's going to have a less impact on interference effect on their hypertrophy or physique style focused training. So yeah, it's really been nothing but positive. And I've found that now people are starting to look for me because I'm posting about cardio. They're like, oh, this guy can mesh these worlds together. Not that there's not a ton of people out there doing the hybrid thing very well at a high level, but it's something that I've now got a year of experience in and really dove deep. And much like Jordan, when I want to learn about something, I go a little psycho on it. My wife now makes fun of me constantly for all the kind of endurance podcasts that I'm listening to and YouTube videos and things like that. And so just trying to learn as much as I can.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's cool. So just, it sounds like more so just, hey, it's again, as a coach, just add another like kind of skill to your repertoire. And then from bringing it up to your clients, it's just, hey, bringing it up, having that conversation and explaining some of the benefits and then just slowly incorporating it in. And I guess at that point, it would just be like, let them see the potential benefits of adding it in and maybe they start to feel better and they want to add in more. I'm curious, Bryan, you hit on it. Maybe Jordan, you guys can both hit on this. Bryan, you said sleep, stuff like that. What are some things maybe like within yourself that you've noticed some benefits of adding in more cardio and then with clients as well too? I don't know if they've mentioned anything from that standpoint. Bryan, you can go first on this one.
I don't know that I have much to add beyond kind of what I said. Sleep is probably the one that is even less noticeable. Like for me, it really is like mood, energy, focus. I just feel like a better version of myself throughout the day when I get my cardio sessions in each week. And it doesn't have to be like every day I get a cardio session, 3 or 4 of them a week. It really makes a significant difference in things throughout life. I guess to provide one real example, when I would just lift and walk, my son would get home from school and be full of energy as 5-year-olds are, and would want to play varieties of games with me, whether it's we play this game goalie in the basement where we set up a goal and we play with a little soft rubber basketball, and it's World Cup. So I get 15 penalty shots and whoever, if I score 15 or he blocks 15, whoever gets to 15 first wins. Great game. And so that's fun. And then the new one he likes to do is play home run derby out in our front yard where we set up bases and there's like ghost runners and all the things we did as kids. I now almost never say no when he wants to come home and do that. And it's because I literally have the energy to do it. When I would just lift and walk, I would literally hit this 3 p.m., 4 p.m. crash every day. And I'd be like, I am just crushed. I don't know how I'm going to make it through the rest of the day. And now that crash doesn't hit me until about 10 minutes before I go to sleep at night. It's completely changed my ability to thrive throughout life.
I will echo the semi-vague energy. No, I don't mean that condescending. It's hard to pinpoint it, but When I was on Jeff, I was on your podcast before. I felt like I was like, I don't know if that much has changed. It's like hard to say. Neither Bryan nor I have gone from sedentary to active or from active to Olympian. And so we're both like moderately more endurance, cardiovascularly fit, whatever. And so it's not like crazy earth shattering, but I will agree with what Bryan says. And I think I would say the same thing with different words, in the sense that everyday activities feel like they are less strenuous. And I know that I'm not like doing manual labor all day, but even just like with the move, like with unpacking boxes, I feel like a machine lately. I feel like I have, like, I'm not getting that 3 p.m. crash, let's say, but I'm also like, it's 7, 8 after dinner. I'm like, great, let's go like undo some boxes. We've been like putting together a new storage thing in the garage. And I just feel like more energetic. Like these daily things aren't as daunting. Like I mentally feel like I have the energy to do that right now. And that's happened the last, I don't know, month or two, where I'm like getting more shit done in my life. And I think it's because each of those things, the energy threshold I need to like actually get up and do them emotionally is lower. I'm just like, I'm ready to do those things. And I just go and I get those things done in a similar fashion of, I love that you're like, my kid comes home and I'm like spontaneously more inclined to be like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's go crush World Cup, which sounds like it's going to be on ESPN 8, the Ocho coming up or something.
I think a great way of saying that, Jordan, would be that every daily activity has a better SFR.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, for sure.
No, I love that. That's awesome. What about from a mental standpoint, in terms of, I feel like with weight training and then like cardio, I feel like mentally, at least from the things that I've heard and just doing cardio in the past and whatnot, not in a good way, not good. And it's been a while. I do feel like it's a little bit like different from a mental standpoint in terms of like how the training is. Do you guys agree with that? Do you have any thoughts on that or anything you want to add to that aspect? Do you notice that it is a little bit different from, hey, if you are coming from like a weight training background and then now doing more cardio, do you think it is different mentally? And then do you think it's also good to have that sort of like a different mental challenge, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'll go. It's night and day for me. It's night and day. It is, for confounding variables, I'm sure, confounding reasons, but it's way more mentally taxing. I don't mean that negatively. It's way more rewarding. It's two sides of the same coin where, man, I have a newfound respect for endurance athletes. I have a newfound respect for just endurance exercise. Dude, get I need to, if I want to go do my lifts, like I take a pre-workout, stim free, whatever, it doesn't matter. I placebo, I go down there and I have a great time. And I don't need to amp myself up. And it goes with in my opinion, the intermittent effort meets both my skill set and my preference, which are intertwined, where I don't mind working really hard for 40 to 70 seconds in a set and then sitting down on my butt for 3 to 5 minutes. That is way less mentally taxing. It fits my character. It fits what I'm good at. I have way more practice doing it. And it's same with the endurance exercise, where I have one kind of like sprint interval day per week. And that day is my least daunting, even if fatigue wise, it's incredibly fatiguing. I get on the bike and I'm like ready to do that workout. And it's incredibly tiring, but something about, hey, work hard for 15 seconds, rest for a minute 4 is like way less taxing than, hey, work moderately hard for 60 minutes or something, or 6-minute intervals of moderate difficulty. And so I have a newfound respect, just a newfound appreciation. And I'm, again, just enjoying sucking. And from a mental toughness standpoint, I'm like, that's what gets me pumped up about it. Even though I don't enjoy doing it, I know that going out eventually for longer runs is so foreign to me that I just believe that there's room for mental growth. Let's say there's room for growth on that tree for me, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I guess I find a little bit of the opposite. I find in some ways that lifting and cardio can be similar, and in some ways they're very different. And I was trying to make sense of my thoughts as you were talking, because I find both lifting and zone 2 to be a little bit cathartic. I find it like I can almost stay parasympathetic throughout most lifting and all zone 2 work. And so in that sense, they're similar. The interval day for cardio is awful. It's not what Jordan's doing.
How long are your intervals?
Yeah, it's not what Jordan's doing. So
I have one day that's 6-minute intervals, and it is, I lose sleep over it. I lose sleep over it. Yeah.
So my intervals now look at a minimum of 4 minutes and a maximum of, let's go climb that mountain and it'll take a half hour. And that's literally like what my hard days are now. And if I'm doing interval like repeats of 4 to 8 minutes, I'm going to accumulate 30 to 40 minutes of work time. And that I don't know, lose sleep is maybe the wrong way of saying that, but I get quite stressed out about that. Yeah. And I don't look forward to them at all. It would be like the equivalent of Oh, sorry, a text just came through and I lost my train of thought. But it would be the equivalent of a max out week on lifting. Like your week 6, everything's to failure plus partials plus drop sets and whatever. It's like the highest intensity level. And so I feel like about the way I do cardio intervals feels like that the peak week of lifting, whereas zone or regular lifting week feel very different for me. And so I very much love zone 2. I look forward to my zone 2 workouts like nothing else. And I think a big piece of that is that I get to get out on my bike and be outside in warm weather. I do not enjoy sitting on a trainer indoors for 45 to 75 minutes doing zone 2. And I dread the winter because that's going to be the majority of what my zone 2 work looks like. And so it makes me think about periodizing out the year in a sense where colder months become more hypertrophy focused and I go back to my roots and I'm more in like maintenance mode for cardio. And then when it gets really nice out and I can do my cardio outside, I kind of shift things around and make cardio more of a priority for the warmer months. And so I think that's more than likely what my next 5 years are going to look like. It's tough to project out that long when I've only been doing cardio for a year, but that would be my guess going forward.
That makes a ton of sense. And I think a big confounder as to why I don't feel that way. I've done all of my zone 2 in my living room on my air bike, which in some ways is great. Like I can watch a ball game or I can turn on like a podcast or something and I can watch my TV and that's great. And I like that. And on the flip side, there's only one workout I do outside, which is my run practice, which is like very short interval, low RPE, like skill development. And I was just in Austin where it was like 111. And now I'm in Raleigh, which is like, today is super duper hot, but it's not been so bad, but it's hot enough where I'm flipped with you, where I'm like, right now is when I'm indoors doing my cardio. I went out and did one of my run practices outside at the same exact pace. And I'm like, oh, RPE is much higher. I was doing it on my treadmill indoors, which could be easier for alternative reasons as well, but no air conditioning, nothing. And flip sides, I don't look forward to them as much because I'm indoors. I feel like if I was outside, it's a chance to get sun in my body. And like you said, it's nice warm weather versus heat stress, warm weather, RPE, heightening warm weather. I anticipate us talking again in the winter and me being like, wow, it's great to get outside. And you being like, fuck.
Oh man. Yeah. I think running is tough too, because you don't get the airflow that you do with biking. When you're going at 14 to 18 miles an hour or whatever it is, there's significant airflow. And even on days where I've gone biking in the summer and it's 95 or 92 or something like that, I am okay because I'm biking. When I go walk and I'm like, I'll walk it out after my bike ride, it's like immediate sweat. But biking, it's almost like absent of sweat. And so there's a certain like cooling effect that comes along with that. That's enjoyable.
Yeah. The Airdyne hooks it up.
Oh yeah. You do get airflow. Yeah.
Airdyne is great. I did the Airdyne the first day I was here. It was in my garage and it was bearable. I cracked myself up though. So I was in the garage and I was still a little hot. The Airdyne definitely cools you off. It's such a good feature of the machine, even though that's not necessarily the point, but I wanted more. So I took my like big fan that I have in my garage and I pointed it on my face and I was going and I was like in the mud. I was like, bro, my watts are where they need to be, but I'm working so fucking hard. And then I was like, the fan is pointing at me and I'm biking and the fan is moving in the other direction. So I was fighting the resistance from the air pushing towards me. And I was like, and I immediately got up, moved the fan to like next to me. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I like hit a stride. I'm like, holy crap. I thought I just lost all my fitness in 1 week of moving. Yeah, it was not good.
Air makes a huge difference, man. I was watching YouTube videos on aerodynamics of airflow and stuff. And it's wild the things that impact airflow. People have bags. There's a tube bag that helps aerodynamics, but a front bag that hurts aerodynamics. And it's all very interesting.
So basically it sounds like the SFR got worse by putting the fan facing you. Like yes. That, the way you had it set up.
SFR got worse being.
I love it. Cool. Yeah, no, I think those are all great points there. Is there anything, I guess what we'll do now is change gears and go towards maybe how you would incorporate both like cardio and weight training and muscle growth into a program, just maybe some things to look out for here. I think that'll be super interesting to spend the rest of our topic around that. Yeah, I guess how we'll take this is what are some things to really look out for and maybe what are some mistakes people make with this? What are some common mistakes when they do try to program it? And then I have a couple small variables that maybe we can talk about, but I just want to get your general overall thoughts there with it, combining it, and then we can see where the top, where it leads us. I can't remember who went first last time. I think it was Jordan. Bryan, I'll hand it to you first, and then Jordan, you can follow up.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake is probably just doing too much cardio if hypertrophy is your goal. I still think there's value in where you're placing these sessions. I would have been more bullish on that statement a number of months ago. And through my N1 experience, I just don't see a ton of impact regardless of where I place stuff for the most part. Like clearly doing intervals the day of or day after a hard leg workout would probably be a bad idea. You're just not going to perform as well on the intervals. Whereas vice versa, you wouldn't want to put your intervals right before your leg day because that would take all of the glycogen that you need for your legs, assuming you're doing it on the same day. But I don't even think you would need to worry if you put intervals the day before. You had a couple meals, you slept, you woke up, you had a meal, and then you went and trained legs. I don't think there's a huge crossover impact from that. I don't really notice any negative impact from zone 2 work, whether it's before training, after training, the day before training, the day after training. It really just, it doesn't seem to matter at all. I do find heart rate is slightly more difficult to manage if you do your zone 2 directly after lifting. You just aren't able to produce as much force to keep your heart rate in the right zone. So that's like one thing to keep in mind. I think running probably changes my answers a little bit because of the eccentric load associated with running. Probably kick that over to Jordan and let him discuss on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think modality is certainly a consideration. If you're doing something with a low eccentric component, low impact, something like biking, then something like rowing is like purely concentric, basically, then you're going to get less sore. And so it's going to be less interfering from a day-to-day, like showing up your workout sore from a row session probably won't happen or is less likely to happen. The big rocks for me is from a total work perspective. So the less you do in total, the less organization matters. The more you're going to do, the more risk you run. So if you're like, hey, I'm lifting 3 days a week and doing 2 days of cardio, I don't really give a fuck. It doesn't really matter that much, to be honest with you. You're not like, there's still better and worse ways, but the scale of how much that the order matters depends on how much total stress of both things that you're doing. And the second is the less intense it is, the less it matters. You can put zone 2 like wherever you want. I mean, again, I'm not saying there might not be better or worse ways. I'm less concerned when you're doing your zone 2. I'm more concerned, like Bryan said, when you're doing your hard, high intensity interval sessions, let's say, the ones that are more like lifting, the ones that are potentially more fatiguing, more likely to cause soreness. So the less intense it is, the less it matters. The less you do, the less it matters. And the overarching principle is don't show up to the thing you care about most really tired or sore. And so if you look at your week and you're like, what are the things that are really tough, my higher intensity workouts, things I know I'm going to be sore from, are things I'm doing immediately after that, things I really care about performance on. And so Bryan said, don't do your intervals the day after your leg day, which I agree. If you care about the performance on your intervals, if you're training for a race where like Bryan needs to make sure his interval sessions are like really spot on, that's a less good organization for sure. And so it depends how much you're doing, the intensity you're doing, and then the overarching principles. When you look at your program, are you showing up to the thing you really need to perform well on? Are you showing up really tired and sore or fatigued? Don't do that. So I know that those are more general, but I think most people listening to this podcast aren't going to embark on a hybrid journey where they're doing 8 to 15 sessions per week, such that the organization is super meticulous. Most people probably going to have one high intensity cardio day max. You'd have to be training like Bryan or beyond in terms of the ambitiousness of your goal to ever have more than one high intensity day. And don't put that before the lift you care about a lot. Or if you really care about that, don't put it after a leg day, for example. Or if you're doing like swimming, it depends on what modality you're doing. But yeah, and so those are like, if I'm looking at my own training, I have 2 zone 2s, which I can place where I want. I have 2 run practices, which I can kind of place where I want. When I say that, they don't impact the lifts prior or after that. And then I have 1 longer interval day, which is between a 4 and 8 minute interval repeats. And then I have 1 sprint interval day, which is very high intensity, which we are going to begin to phase out in a bit. And so those, where I put those, I don't want to be sore for them and I don't want to be sore from them. But at the moment, my priority is the endurance exercise. So if push comes to shove, I'd rather show up to my leg day a little fatigued. I think I'm still able to organize it in a way that makes sense. But you do have to pick what your priority is. There's going to be some give and take in some circumstances. And so I think that's an important thing to establish is, hey, I don't know about you, Bryan, but I followed Alyssa for a long time. And Alyssa used to say things like, when you're doing hybrid training, you're just going to do some of these workouts, not always feeling your best. You're not always going to feel 10 out of 10. And I've tried to embrace that because it turns out like sometimes how you feel is a lie. And like I've showed up to a leg day where I like walk down the stairs first thing in the morning and I'm like, ooh, my quads and hip flexors are a little bit like I could feel them. And then I show up to my quad day and I crushed it. I'm not saying that always happens, but yeah, that I suppose is my spiel there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I don't feel awesome for every session I do. I have literally 6 or 7 bike sessions a week and 3 lifting sessions a week. So there's 10 sessions over 7 days. There's some doubles in there. Like today, I lifted and did a bike ride. And not always do I feel awesome. And usually the one I don't feel awesome for is lifting. And as soon as I warm up and like the structure of the way I'm doing my full body routine now is I choose a number of movements between 2 and 4, and I do them as a circuit, resting between each, but I'll warm up one round and then it'll be like a 4 RIR, 5 RIR round, and then a 2 RIR round, and then a failure round. So there's one hard set at the end. By the time I get through the warm-up round and I get into the 4 or 5 RIR round, I'm already starting to feel good. And I can know within that round whether the failure round is going to go well or not. And in most cases, it goes well. And yeah, I think you don't have to feel awesome every day. A really good point by Jordan that the more you're doing, the more you have to be concerned about where it's placed. And the less you're doing and the less intensity of your cardio, the less you really need to worry about it. And if you're like a normal person whose goal is hypertrophy, you're doing cardio for health, so you're doing mostly zone 2, and you have one interval type session that maybe you throw on a weekend somewhere or something, I just wouldn't really concern yourself too much with it.
I will give you a real world example. In my group program right now, we are doing 4 days a week of hypertrophy. It's a hypertrophy focused group, but I throw 2 optional cardio days in there. And we've been doing just exclusively zone 2 as our optional cardio days, 2 of them. And that's great. And I think that generally, like we've talked about, that's a wonderful supplement to your hypertrophy training, supplement for health. Awesome. But just out of my own antsiness, I was like, let's do something different. So we did 1 zone 2 and we have 1 sprint interval day now. Again, all optional. And organizing it during the week is something that, again, everybody is asks about when they join the group. They're like, oh my God, can I move this over here? Because everyone's got a different schedule, and that's cool. But in the program, it's written such that you have legs, and the next day is a sprint interval day, and the next day is an off day, and then you restart the week. And I write in the group, and I said, listen, the only thing that matters is that because this is a hypertrophy group, I'm going to frame this as if that's your main goal, is that you're not showing up to a leg day after the sprint interval day. You can do sprints and the next day do upper, and you're going to be fine. And so just don't do sprints and then legs. And as far as a general, like that's 4 days of lifting, 2 days of cardio. And the only thing I will tell you in terms of arranging it is don't do the sprints and then legs. That's the only thing you can't do. And so organization it's not a non-issue, but it is within realistic. That's still 6 sessions a week. So even someone who's doing 6 workouts a week, only stipulation I've given them is don't do that. And so, yeah, you'd have to be doing quite a bit of, I'm doing 10 sessions and that's still, Ryan's doing 10 too. And that's still, I'm still not at a point where it's so crazy meticulous in terms of exercise order. Of course, a bit more, but yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like, again, the importance of just figuring out what your goal is, what you want to prioritize is just super important. And unfortunately, you can't really you can try to make it the best of both, but again, having that, hey, at the end of the day, what is the one that you want to prioritize can be super helpful, and that can answer a lot of your questions there. So I have a few questions specifically on like zone 2. If you guys don't mind answering these, maybe I'll ask both of them at the same time. One of the questions is, hey, doing like 45 minutes is just, it just sucks to sit there and do it for 45 minutes. We talked about that. Can you split it up? Do you guys how much does that matter if you split it up or not? And then second part of that is also like modalities. Is it like in terms of switching it up, is that something that you'd say, hey, just again, so long as you're getting in that zone 2, that's the most important? Or how much do you want to pay attention to these variables? I think Jordan, you're up first this time.
What was the first part of that question?
So it was like the duration of it from like a zone 2, just health perspective. Do you have to hit that threshold of a certain time, or what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, just imagine that the first 10 minutes are just a warm up. And I don't want to be like the first 10 minutes don't count at all. But if you wanted to get in 90 minutes of zone 2, it's doing 9 times 10 minutes would not nearly be as good as doing 2 times 45. So those would all be spent going from your resting heart rate up to speed. And not to minimize the potentially more scientific breakdown of this, but imagine that like you're just not getting all of those processes started that you're actually trying to work for the first 10 minutes, that there's a bit more of a local energy use than a systemic energy use in those first 10 minutes before you're warmed up, quote unquote. And so I would say, just as a rule of thumb, if you're going to soundbite it, to not count the first 10 minutes. And so if you're trying to get 100 minutes of zone 2 per week, then I think you could say, okay, you could do 5 times 30 minutes, which is technically 150 total minutes for 100 net minutes of zone 2, or you could do 3 times 43 minutes and you could still get to that 100 minutes. And so I just would say that, not that 100 minutes is I just pulled that roughly out of thin air here, but I do think that if you're going to get on for 20 minutes, it's still 100% better than nothing. Oh my God, yes, it is. It sure as shit is. But I do think that if you can get longer, then you can pay off that warm up and then start to accrue a little bit more of an adaptation by staying on a bit longer. And dovetail is, yeah, but if you're only doing, let's say you only have 2 times a week, 20 minutes, and you don't have the option to do fucking 6 times 20 minutes, you only have 2 times 20 minutes, you could probably just go a little bit faster and not worry about being in zone 2, because like we talked about, if you're not doing as much, then what you do and where it goes doesn't matter as much. So I told people in my group when we were doing 2 times 60 minutes of zone 2 was the optional. I'm like, you only have 2 times 20 minutes, then I don't care if you go a little faster. And frankly, there's an argument you should. And so that is more or less how I feel about that. I think I don't want to, I think if you're somebody who's got less time, then you can consider going a bit faster and without there being any repercussions. And I would just say, hey, just acknowledge that there's a period of time warming up that needs to be paid before you really get into the adaptation portion.
Yeah, I agree literally with all of that. I was probably going to say it very similarly. The first 10 minutes being the warm up and then going from there. I do try to get 60-ish minutes per session, assuming that the first 10 or 15 are more warm up, and then you find your steady state from there. Jordan said, though, if the number one important piece is just doing it. And so if doing it is a multiple 20-minute sessions, then that's better than not doing it. And if you're not even able to hit enough of those sessions to equal the total number of minutes you want, then increase the intensity, like Jordan said. And then Jeff, remind us what your second part of the question was.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the modality, like switching that up from each time you do it. I didn't know if that was similar from when you're training for hypertrophy, you want to try to keep it similar, what that looks like, or how much you need to worry about that.
Yeah, I would just say the eccentric loading is going to cause more muscle damage. So something like running is going to just be more of a challenge to combine and to mitigate the interference effect. However, when you choose a concentrically dominated option, rowing or biking, I don't really think that it really matters if you switch it up. You just want to be able to, like I told you when you first started doing it, I just want you to go back to the same thing every week or 2 weeks at some point so that you can assess what's happening in your improvement and things like that. If every time you do it, it's, hey, this week I'm going to row 45, next week I'm going to bike 60, and then the week after that I'm going to run 30, and then I'm going to go swim 60. And before you know it, it's been like 2 months and suddenly you get back to your row 45. Yeah, at least you're getting you're like, hey, 2 months, like I should see some improvement. But that's also a lot of time if you don't improve to then try to figure out what's going on and why we're not seeing improvement. There's the skill component as well. Like you're going to see improvement just by getting better at the thing that you're doing. And so doing that more is going to be better for you. And you'll probably see adaptations faster via the skill component too. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add on to that, Jordan.
No, I would echo the point that like, I don't mean this in an absolute sense, but more in a relative sense, that running is the worst. It's the hardest on your joints and it's the hardest on your muscles. From an eccentric loading perspective, it's all about total load management though. So you can do all of this stuff in a very healthy way, and running's not bad, but in a relative sense, if you're agnostic and you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I want to do some cardio, man, go get on the elliptical, get on the arc trainer, get on the bike, get on something that doesn't have a big eccentric component. I didn't have my Airdyne while we were in the move, and I was just at a local gym and I got on an arc trainer and I had the absolute best time. I'm like, I could be on here all day long. I even found that like at higher heart rates, my RPE was lower. It just was such an easy, low skill thing. It had no impact. And I just felt like I could just go. And I'm sure that there's some room to investigate that. But I would say if you're completely agnostic, maybe don't say I'm going to start a whole bunch of running. I am running. And so the irony is I'm doing very little running. And Bryan is throwing some jabs of, I can't believe you're running. And he's like, totally. And I know that when this is all said and done, like I will switch to a different modality for my like lifelong health cardio pursuits, let's say. But yeah, that would be one thing. So your question, Jeff, in terms of, okay, I'm just a health person, like, should I do the same thing every time? Should I do something different? It doesn't really matter. From a health perspective, like the bar for getting the health benefits is quite low. The arguments for the SFR goes up when you do the same thing over time because you get better at doing it, and you can actually perform a higher wattage, and you can actually get a greater stimulus with less fatigue if you're continuing to do that same modality. But from a health perspective, that's lost in the weeds. That's definitely not. Does a person who wants to lift for health, can they go in and do any chest press variation at all and just do horizontal push, horizontal pull, bicep, tricep, delt, or whatever, and pick any variation and do it 4 times a week and work close to failure, you can absolutely check the box for health doing that. But for the person who's, I want to build more muscle, it's all right, we want to do that. We want this like same exercise so I can track, like Bryan said, so we can actually see if you're getting better, but also to benefit from those neurological adaptations for sure.
Yeah, just because of my experience so far with it's just finding that right intensity so I could just see where different modalities could just mess with that a little bit. Like you said, trying not to switch it too much and just take that thought process out of it each time. But that's probably not a bad thing either to do that every once in a while too. So cool. We're coming up here on 90 minutes. So I wanted to leave you both with, was there anything maybe we missed or anything that you want to take home with this talk? Bryan, I'll have you go first and then Jordan, you can finish up.
I would just say that I've been surprised at how high I can push the volume of cardiovascular work and have minimal or no impact on my lifting. I think that there's definitely something to be said for the fact that I did it pretty gradually. I didn't go from just lifting in steps to 7 cardio sessions a week. I kind of stair-stepped that over the last year. So our body is very resilient and can adapt to a lot of things when you stair-step it up like that. But yeah, overall, I'm just very surprised at how resilient our bodies are and how adaptive we are. And I think that being able to combine these 2 modalities and see positive benefits from both is something that probably is going to change the game of training over the next 5, 10 plus years.
I think my addition would be not to make a big assumption about who's listening to this podcast, but I think not just the people listening to this podcast, but probably most people are in a place where they want to lift for health, but they also want to lift because it makes them look good. But they're hearing a lot of this chatter about cardio. And so they're like, I would love to do this cardio just for health, a minimum effective dose just for health. But they get really caught in the weeds in some of the stuff that we talked about today, hopefully dispelling some of that of like, how do I organize it? What modality do I do? What should my heart rate be? Like, where do I put this in the week? And if you're just doing this for health, the bar for doing that is so low, not like in a condescending way, but just get the fuck out there on a modality that you like for 20 to 60 minutes, a couple times a week. Unless you're like running yourself into the ground 4 days a week, then we're going to have to talk about managing fatigue. But man, if you guys are lifting 3 to 5 times a week and you're like, I'd like to do some cardio for health, great. Pick something that you like. And I will echo a counterpoint of, yeah, okay, putting some structure on it also makes me have more fun with it. So I get it that people want to put structure on it. I'm down with that. But if that feeling of, oh my God, I don't know what to do, so I do nothing, you have that paralysis analysis, fuck that. Just pick a modality you like, get on the elliptical after your workout. Like people used to do this. People used to work out and then just get on the elliptical or the treadmill for a bit. But then it became this thing of, oh, it has to be this exact thing. And it's okay. It can be a little bit more structured, but because you're only doing it for health, it doesn't need to be as structured as your lifting, which you are clearly more serious about. And so, man, if you want to do 30 minutes on a piece of cardio equipment after your lifts a couple times a week, like you're doing awesome.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. Same thing with training, getting caught up in all the small variables. Like you said, just go and do it. And that's going to be the most important thing. So awesome, guys. A ton of great information in here. I'm going to link your normal stuff that you have at the end and whatnot. We don't have to go through all that. People know where to find you, I feel like, at this point, but we'll make sure we link all that in the show notes. Awesome chatting with both of you guys. I think people will take a lot from this. And yeah, we'll have to do this again soon.
Thanks, dude. Appreciate it.